The envelope sat on the porch like a small bomb waiting to explode. White, official-looking, stamped with the HOA's emblem, it demanded attention. The narrator picked it up cautiously, feeling the weight of authority pressing down. "Remove your gate," it read in bold, unapologetic letters. "For community access." A chill ran down their spine. This was not a suggestion, a casual notice, or even a polite request. This was a command. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows over the iron gate that had stood for decades, guarding the quiet serenity of the property. The gate wasn't just a barrier. It was a symbol of privacy, history, and ownership passed down through generations. Now those values were under threat, challenged by an organization that claimed to act for the good of the community, yet had no legal claim over the land. The narrator's hands tightened around the envelope as a sense of resolve began to form. Some neighbors would nod and whisper, some would tremble at the thought of defying the HOA, but not this narrator. The calm, deliberate breathing slowed the rush of anger and replaced it with strategy. It wasn't enough to refuse, they would need to make a statement. A silent defiance, executed with precision. And so, the morning air vibrated with anticipation, the quiet before a storm that had been brewing long before the letter arrived. In the distance, familiar faces of HOA board members and Karen-type personalities would soon appear, clipboard in hand, expressions of entitlement written clearly across their faces. They believed they could dictate the terms, that their rules were absolute. They didn't yet understand that the gate was not just metal and bolts, but a testament to rights that would not be compromised. With the envelope now carefully placed on the counter, the narrator stepped back, eyes fixed on the gate, imagining the confrontation to come. Every instinct screamed caution, yet determination burned hotter than fear. If the HOA expected compliance, they would be sorely mistaken. And somewhere in the quiet morning a plan was already forming, a way to defy expectation and assert authority without raising a hand, without shouting. It was subtle, clever, and irreversible. The stage was set. The actors were unknowingly arriving. And the gate, standing silent and steadfast, was about to witness the most decisive moment of the property's recent history. The envelope sat on the porch like a small bomb waiting to explode. White, official-looking, stamped with the HOA's emblem, it demanded attention. The narrator picked it up cautiously, feeling the weight of authority pressing down. "Remove your gate," it read in bold, unapologetic letters. "For community access." A chill ran down their spine. This was not a suggestion, a casual notice, or even a polite request. This was a command. Outside, the morning sun cast long shadows over the iron gate that had stood for decades, guarding the quiet serenity of the property. The gate wasn't just a barrier. It was a symbol of privacy, history, and ownership passed down through generations. Now those values were under threat, challenged by an organization that claimed to act for the good of the community, yet had no legal claim over the land. The narrator's hands tightened around the envelope as a sense of resolve began to form. Some neighbors would nod and whisper, some would tremble at the thought of defying the HOA, but not this narrator. The calm, deliberate breathing slowed the rush of anger and replaced it with strategy. It wasn't enough to refuse, they would need to make a statement. A silent defiance, executed with precision. And so, the morning air vibrated with anticipation, the quiet before a storm that had been brewing long before the letter arrived. In the distance, familiar faces of HOA board members and Karen-type personalities would soon appear, clipboard in hand, expressions of entitlement written clearly across their faces. They believed they could dictate the terms, that their rules were absolute. They didn't yet understand that the gate was not just metal and bolts, but a testament to rights that would not be compromised. With the envelope now carefully placed on the counter, the narrator stepped back, eyes fixed on the gate, imagining the confrontation to come. Every instinct screamed caution, yet determination burned hotter than fear. If the HOA expected compliance, they would be sorely mistaken. And somewhere in the quiet morning a plan was already forming, a way to defy expectation and assert authority without raising a hand, without shouting. It was subtle, clever, and irreversible. The stage was set. The actors were unknowingly arriving. And the gate, standing silent and steadfast, was about to witness the most decisive moment of the property's recent history. The sun had barely risen when the first knock rattled at my front door. I opened it to find Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, already armed with a clipboard and that smug smile I'd come to know too well. "Your gate," she said without even a good morning, "has been deemed a violation of community access rules." I raised an eyebrow. "Community access to what?" "This is my driveway." Karen smirked as if she'd caught me red-handed. "The HOA board has voted unanimously. The gate restricts flow of traffic and communal enjoyment. You'll need to remove it within 10 days. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Enjoyment? My land isn't a park." Her smile flickered but didn't vanish. "You agreed to the HOA when you purchased here. You knew the rules." "I didn't purchase," I corrected her coolly. "I inherited this property. And as far as I can tell, my deed doesn't list any obligation to entertain the neighborhood." Karen's face tightened. For the first time, her mask cracked, and I saw the frustration underneath. But she quickly recovered, tapping her clipboard. "Refusal to comply comes with fines. Daily fines." I glanced past her at the gate, standing tall, iron bars solid and freshly painted, a silent guardian against nosy neighbors and entitled board members. That gate wasn't just metal. It was a boundary, a line in the sand. "I'm not removing it," I said flatly. Karen's smirk returned, but this time it carried venom. "We'll see what the board thinks." Within days, bright red violation notices began to pile up in my mailbox. Every one of them stamped in bold: "Remove the gate or face consequences." Neighbors started whispering when I walked by. Some avoided eye contact, while others made snide comments about me being selfish or uncooperative. It wasn't long before I caught wind of Karen's little campaign. At the next community gathering, she stood tall in front of the crowd, declaring that my gate was a hazard, an eyesore, and worst of all, a slap in the face to the spirit of togetherness. Her words stirred the crowd, and I saw the nods of agreement. But behind those nods, I also caught glimmers of doubt. Some neighbors weren't so sure. They liked their gated communities when it suited them. They liked privacy when it was their own. And deep down, they knew what Karen really wanted: control. Still, the pressure grew heavier each day. More notices, more threats, more gossip. Karen even had the audacity to walk right up to my gate one afternoon and rattle it, testing its strength like she was daring me to confront her. I stepped onto the porch, arms folded. "Something wrong, Karen?" She jumped but quickly plastered on her faux smile. "Oh, just checking the structural integrity. For safety." "Funny," I replied, "because it looks like you're checking whether you can push your way through." Her cheeks flushed crimson. She turned on her heel without a word. That night, I sat on my porch and stared at the gate as the sun dipped behind it. Karen thought she was winning. She thought her flyers, fines, and fake authority were chipping away at me. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that every threat, every violation notice, every whispered rumor was only making my resolve stronger. They wanted me to take the gate down. I was already planning to make it bigger, stronger, and smarter. Because if Karen and her HOA cronies thought they had seen defiance before, they hadn't seen anything yet. The next weeks unfolded like a slow-burning storm, each day darker than the last, each interaction with the HOA more absurd and intrusive. It began with the cabins. At first, they were small, almost harmless structures that appeared on the far end of the community near the wooded border of my land. Karen called them guest cottages, built to enhance the charm of the neighborhood, but I knew better. They weren't amenities. They were business ventures disguised as community projects. I watched as more cabins sprouted up, one after another, until the count reached 38. They were renting them out to outsiders, advertising them online with glossy pictures of the lake and the surrounding ranch land, my ranch land. The photos were taken from angles that conveniently cropped out my gate, but not my fields, my oaks, my shoreline. Strangers began wandering near my property, some cutting across the grass as if it were a public trail. The piece of the ranch, once steady and untouched, was now riddled with the sound of car doors slamming, children yelling, and strangers' feet crunching through gravel that wasn't theirs to walk on. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, the violation notices doubled. Karen and her board invented new infractions almost daily. One notice accused me of letting my grass grow unsightly, though the grass was neatly mowed. Another fined me for improper fencing, claiming my iron gate did not meet community standards. The boldest one fined me for obstructing community development, as if my refusal to yield my land for their cabins was itself a punishable offense. Neighbors started to treat me like the villain of the neighborhood. At barbecues and block parties, which I was never invited to, Karen's narrative spread like wildfire. I was stubborn, anti-community, the outsider who didn't belong. Some nodded along because it was easier. Others because they feared being on Karen's bad side. But a few looked uneasy, their eyes darting away when I passed, as though they knew something was off but didn't dare admit it. I kept quiet, letting the storm rage, all while gathering proof. I spent hours at the county records office, digging through files, retrieving every deed, every survey, every boundary map that proved what I already knew. The land was mine. Every acre of it, inherited fair and square. I collected photographs of the cabins creeping across my property line, screenshots of the rental ads where my fields were used as selling points, and even witness statements from hikers who had been told by the HOA that the ranch was community-owned. Each piece of evidence was another brick in the wall I was building, a wall they wouldn't see until it was too late. Karen, of course, grew bolder, mistaking my silence for surrender. One afternoon, she showed up at my gate again, this time with 2 board members flanking her. She waved a fresh notice in the air. "Final warning," she declared, her voice sharp enough to slice the still air. "Remove the gate or we'll take legal action." I walked down the path slowly, deliberately, until I stood just a few feet from her. I could see the confidence in her eyes, the smug assurance that she was untouchable. "Legal action?" I repeated calmly. "Do you really want to go down that road, Karen?" She smirked. "We're the HOA. We make the rules." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I simply nodded. "Then let's see whose rules hold up in court." Her smile faltered, but she masked it quickly. Still, I could tell she didn't like the idea of me sounding so sure of myself. That night, under the glow of a single porch light, I spread the documents across my kitchen table, like a general laying out battle plans. The deed with my grandfather's name passed down to me. The survey map showing the exact property lines the cabins had clearly crossed. The rental listings bragging about lake access they didn't own. The violation notices, each more ludicrous than the last, a paper trail of harassment and overreach. I stared at the stack, my pulse steady, my resolve unshakable. They thought they were clever, building their empire of cabins and rules. They thought they were untouchable, hiding behind community votes and forged authority. But I had something they didn't: the law, the land, and the patience to wait until the perfect moment to strike. As the crickets sang outside and the iron gate stood tall in the moonlight, I knew the tide was about to turn. Karen believed she was tightening the noose. She didn't realize I was the one holding the rope. The announcement came on a crisp Saturday morning, slipped into every mailbox in the community, and posted boldly on the HOA bulletin board: Grand Meeting of the Cabin Community. The flyer was decorated with smiling stock photos of families, campfires and children splashing by the lake, my lake. Karen's name was listed at the bottom in bold as the event chair, her signature flourish beneath it, as if she were the rightful owner of everything the images promised. It was to be held in the community hall, and the purpose was clear. They wanted to show off their so-called achievement, the 38 cabins they had paraded as the HOA's greatest project. I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not with anger, not with loud protests or threats, but with the quiet, sharp certainty of a truth they could not run from. When I arrived at the hall, the room was already buzzing with chatter. Folding chairs were set in rows, every seat filled with eager neighbors, their voices weaving a hum of excitement. Some spoke about rental income, others about how the cabins brought fresh energy to the community. I stood at the back for a while, unnoticed, watching Karen at the front of the room. She looked in her element, clipboard in hand, pearls around her neck, her blazer sharp and pressed. She gestured as she spoke, painting a vision of a thriving neighborhood built on unity and growth. Her board members nodded along, adding their voices to the chorus of self-congratulation. To anyone watching, it looked like a celebration of progress. To me, it looked like a house of cards swaying in the wind. Karen eventually noticed me at the back. For a flicker of a second, her smile wavered, but she quickly recovered, plastering on a grin. "Ah, I see even our more hesitant members have joined us," she said loudly, drawing a few chuckles from the crowd. I didn't respond. I simply made my way to the front, moving slowly, deliberately, until I stood at the edge of the stage where Karen had been parading her speech. The room quieted. A ripple of curiosity spread through the audience. They were used to seeing me silent, standing behind my gate, avoiding the spotlight. This was different. I pulled the leather folder from under my arm and set it gently on the podium, the snap of the clasp loud in the hush. Karen's eyes darted to it, her hand tightening around her clipboard. I looked out at the crowd, taking in every face, neighbors I had grown up around, some of whom now looked at me with doubt, others with guilt, a few with relief. "I've listened quietly for a long time," I began, my voice even, calm. "I've watched cabins rise on land that doesn't belong to this association. I've received violation notices that hold no legal weight. And I've heard the stories spread about me, painting me as someone against community. But tonight I'm not here with rumors. I'm here with facts." Karen tried to interrupt, raising her voice to dismiss me, but I opened the folder and held up the first document. The deed to the ranch. My grandfather's name etched on it, transferred legally to mine. Gasps scattered across the room. Karen froze, her words caught in her throat. I laid out the next paper, a county survey map with boundaries clearly marked, bright red lines showing exactly where the cabins had crossed into my property. Murmurs rose, whispers turning into audible shock. I showed photos of the cabins under construction, spilling past the line, photos of the rental ads using my land to sell dreams to strangers. And finally, I produced copies of the violation notices, each one more absurd than the last, evidence of the harassment and intimidation tactics the HOA had waged against me. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the sound of papers fluttering as I spread them across the podium. Karen's face turned pale, then flushed red. Her board members shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, others exchanging panicked glances. The neighbors, once so sure of the HOA's authority, now stared at the documents as if they were seeing the truth for the first time. I looked directly at Karen then, meeting her eyes. "This land is mine," I said, steady and unshaken. "It always has been. And everything you've built on it was done without permission, without right, and without respect." A murmur swelled into a wave of voices, disbelief mixing with outrage. Karen tried to regain control, slamming her clipboard down and shouting about community good and shared vision, but the words rang hollow against the undeniable weight of proof laid bare before them. For the first time, the room wasn't nodding along to her script. They were looking at me. They were questioning her. The balance had shifted, and she knew it. This was the turning point, the moment when the fortress she had built on arrogance and entitlement cracked wide open. The neighbors who once whispered behind my back now whispered to each other, their trust in her unraveling thread by thread. I stood there calmly, not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the quiet power of someone who had waited patiently for truth to speak louder than lies. And it had. The room was electric, thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel heavier. Karen's face was a storm of panic and rage, her once perfect composure unraveling in front of her loyal followers. She slammed her clipboard down, the sound sharp and desperate, and barked, "These documents mean nothing. This is a community decision, and we all agreed to the expansion." But her voice cracked at the edges, betraying the fear she couldn't hide. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into my folder once more and pulled out the final set of papers, official notices signed by my attorney and stamped by the county. I laid them gently on the podium, fanning them out so every pair of eyes in the hall could see. "These are legal notices of trespass and eviction," I said calmly, my words cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Every cabin built on my land is subject to removal or sale under my authority. Effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the uproar. Voices rose all at once, some shouting in disbelief, others demanding answers. A woman near the front stood up, clutching her husband's arm, her face pale. "But we bought our cabin," she cried. "We paid money. Karen said everything was approved." Others chimed in, anger now redirected at the HOA board, panic seeping into their words. Karen tried to shout over them, insisting that the cabins were legitimate, that I was bluffing, but the neighbors weren't listening anymore. The illusion had shattered. I pulled out the final blow, a large envelope stamped with red ink, the bold words, "For sale," printed across the top of each page. "Every one of these properties will be listed for sale to recover damages," I explained. "Because legally they were never yours to begin with." Gasps turned into chaos. People stood, chairs screeched against the floor, voices broke into arguments. Some residents shouted at Karen, demanding refunds, accusing her of fraud. Others pleaded with me, begging for leniency, their dreams of a peaceful cabin retreat crumbling before their eyes. Karen's face twisted, her hands shaking as she tried to grab the documents from the podium, but I stepped back, holding them firmly. "You've lied long enough," I said, my voice steady. "You've built your power on intimidation and deception. That ends today." The sheriff's deputy I had quietly arranged to attend the meeting stepped forward then, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He confirmed everything with a firm nod, adding the weight of law to my words. The room erupted again, but this time, it wasn't chaos directed at me. It was directed at Karen. Residents crowded toward her, shouting, some crying, others furious. The board members backed away, distancing themselves from her sinking ship, their loyalty crumbling under the pressure of truth. The once proud HOA queen stood cornered, her authority dissolving as the walls of her empire closed in. I stayed calm, watching it unfold, not with satisfaction, but with the solemn understanding that justice had finally caught up. Outside, the first for sale signs were already being hammered into the ground near the cabins, bright red letters standing like warnings against arrogance. Families spilled out into the parking lot, some furious, some devastated, others silent in shock. The weight of realization hit them one by one. They had built their lives, their trust, and their money on lies. Karen tried one last desperate move, rushing to the deputy and demanding my arrest for harassment, but the deputy only shook his head. "The law's clear," he said firmly. "This land belongs to him. The cabins are trespassing structures. You'll be hearing from the county soon enough." Her face crumpled, the last mask falling away. She was no longer the powerful leader who ordered gates removed and cabins built. She was just a woman caught in her own web of entitlement, exposed and powerless. I walked out of the hall slowly, the cool night air greeting me like an old friend. Behind me, the chaos continued. Shouts, arguments, the collapse of an empire built on lies. Ahead of me, the road stretched quiet and long, leading back to my gate, my land, my peace. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The battle was over, the truth undeniable, the property once again secure. And as the for sale signs stood tall in the night, I knew the message was clear. Respect cannot be stolen, and ownership cannot be rewritten by arrogance. Justice had spoken, and it echoed louder than Karen's lies ever could. The fallout was unlike anything the community had ever experienced. A slow-burning chaos that unraveled day by day after the meeting. The once tightly controlled world Karen had built under the HOA's banner collapsed like a house of cards in the wind. Word spread quickly. First whispers, then open conversations at the diner, the grocery store, and even in church pews, everyone talking about how the Queen of Rules had been dethroned. The residents who had blindly trusted her now looked at one another with suspicion, realizing how easily they had been deceived. Some neighbors packed their belongings in silence, moving away before the legal storm fully descended, unwilling to fight battles they knew they couldn't win. Others stayed, their faces marked by shame, their voices quieter, approaching me with apologies that sounded fragile, like glass ready to shatter. They admitted they had believed Karen's lies, that they had thought I was just a stubborn outsider unwilling to follow community standards. Now they understood that I had been fighting not for control, but for fairness, for the simple right to keep what was rightfully mine. Lawsuits began piling up against the HOA board. Karen, once untouchable, now found herself surrounded by angry neighbors demanding refunds for cabins they had been told were legitimate. Her mailbox overflowed with legal notices, and her phone, once a tool of intimidation, became a relentless source of calls from attorneys, creditors, and furious residents. The board dissolved quickly, each member scrambling to avoid responsibility, pointing fingers at one another, but the law didn't care for their excuses. The sheriff's office made its presence known in the neighborhood, not as enforcers of HOA rules, but as officers of the law ensuring compliance with property rights. Seeing Karen stand in front of her own home, her confidence stripped away, was a sight that etched itself into my memory. The woman who once demanded that I remove my gate now avoided making eye contact with me, her pride broken, her empire gone. She no longer barked orders at neighbors or waved violation notices in people's faces. Instead, she sat on her porch, staring into the distance, the weight of her downfall pressing on her shoulders like an anchor. For the cabins, the fate was sealed. One by one, they were sold off, each transaction a reminder that arrogance has consequences. Some went to families who respected boundaries, who understood the value of honesty. Others stood vacant for a time, silent monuments to the recklessness of entitlement. Watching the for sale signs come down and new owners move in was bittersweet. It was justice in motion, yet it also reflected the pain of those who had been misled. I never felt joy in their suffering, but I did feel a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the truth had prevailed. The land was mine again, not just on paper, but in spirit. My evenings became peaceful once more. I would stand by the gate, the same gate Karen had once demanded I remove, and listen to the wind rustle through the trees. That gate had become more than just wood and metal. It was a symbol of resistance, of standing firm when others tried to strip away what was yours. Friends and neighbors who had once kept their distance began to wave again, some even stopping to share kind words. A few admitted that Karen had scared them into silence, that they had gone along with her because they feared retaliation. I listened, I nodded, but I didn't hold grudges. People make mistakes, and fear is a powerful motivator. What mattered now was that they saw the truth clearly. Karen eventually disappeared from the neighborhood, her house sold quietly, her name reduced to a cautionary tale. New families moved in, unaware of the storm that had once raged there, and that was fine with me. Let the past stay buried, let the land breathe again without the poison of control. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I leaned against the gate and thought about everything that had happened. Entitlement, I realized, doesn't always wear the mask of greed. Sometimes it cloaks itself in community, in rules, in the illusion of fairness while quietly feeding power-hungry egos. But fairness isn't about control, it's about respect. Respect for property, for boundaries, for the rights of others to live without fear of intimidation. That was the real lesson here. Karen thought she owned respect through fear and rules. But in the end, respect slipped through her fingers because she never gave it in return. As I looked at the land stretching out before me, free and quiet, I understood that ownership isn't just a legal right. It's a responsibility. To protect, to respect, and to honor. And that's what Karen never grasped. She wanted to rule, not to respect. She wanted to control, not to care. And for that, she lost everything. For me, the journey had been long, exhausting, and at times overwhelming. But it left me with clarity. You don't have to shout to prove your strength. You don't have to fight every battle in the open. Sometimes the quiet gathering of truth, the patient waiting for the right moment, is the most powerful weapon of all. My story isn't one of revenge, it's one of balance restored. And as I walked back through that gate, closing it behind me, I whispered to myself the words that had become my truth. Respect is earned, not taken by force.